Just after midnight on July 12, 2019, a frantic 911 call summoned police to a Hallandale Beach, Florida condo. The caller was a friend who had overheard Sylvia fighting with her boyfriend, 43-year-old Adam Crespo, moments before. She rushed into the bedroom to a ghastly scene. 32-year-old Sylvia Galva on her back, not breathing, with a 5-foot spear-like bedpost still lodged in her torso. Crespo was present and yelling for help as the friend desperately tried CPR, but it was too late. The improvised weapon had pierced Sylvia's chest and heart, and nothing could be done to save her. Sylvia Galva and Adam Crespo were a couple who shared that Hallandale Beach home, about 15 miles north of Miami. She was in her early 30s, and he in his late 40s, and by 2019 they had been together for several years. Evidence later suggested turmoil beneath the surface, and prosecutors would describe a pattern of intense arguments between them. On that summer night, one such argument would escalate with deadly consequences. The evening began uneventfully. Sylvia spent the day with a close friend, and around midnight the two met up with Adam for drinks at a hotel bar in nearby Hollywood. The trio returned to Sylvia and Adam's condominium shortly after 1 a.m. Not long after they arrived home, for reasons unknown, a loud argument erupted in the bedroom. The friend could hear heated shouting through the door. Adam was demanding that Sylvia leave, and Sylvia shouted back that she would make a scene rather than go anywhere. What happened next in that bedroom unfolded in a matter of minutes, but would be subject to intensive investigation over the following years. According to Crespo's later statement, he wanted to go to sleep, but Sylvia, who he said was intoxicated, refused to calm down. He then tried to physically remove her from the bed. Crespo grabbed Sylvia by the ankles and began dragging her off the mattress. Desperate to resist, Sylvia clutched one of the tall wooden bedposts at the foot of the bed. This was an ornamental post that doubled as a detachable spear with a 12-inch metal blade on its tip. As Crespo yanked on her legs, the post suddenly snapped. The long spear-shaped rod broke free and drove straight into Sylvia's chest. In an instant, the sharp blade impaled her. Crespo later told police investigators he heard the snap, then turned to see the spear tip lodged in Sylvia's torso. Panicking, he pulled the blade out in an attempt to quote-unquote save her. But the injury was catastrophic, likely fatal almost immediately. Their friend rushed to dial emergency services and tried to revive Sylvia until paramedics arrived, but there was nothing more she could do. And once again, I have to emphasize that this version of events is all according to a statement that was given by Crespo in the wake of the event. In time, a jury would have the opportunity to consider whether this version of events was to be accepted, or if something much more sinister was at play that evening. Galva was pronounced dead at the scene, so police immediately secured the condo unit as a potential crime scene. Police officers arrived to find Sylvia already dead and Adam Crespo on the scene. Crespo, distraught, immediately cooperated. He waived his right to an attorney and gave a sworn statement describing the incident as a terrible accident. He insisted he never meant to harm Sylvia and that her impalement, he claimed, was an unforeseen result of their tussle. In essence, Crespo said that Sylvia fell onto the spear during the struggle, implying that her death was a freak occurrence rather than an intentional act. Detectives, however, treated the scene as a potential slaying. They seized the broken bedpost and other evidence from the bedroom. Florida investigators even hoped the always-listening Alexa devices might have captured audio of the struggle. Amazon complied with the subpoena and provided whatever recordings existed. However, the company noted that Echo speakers only record audio when triggered by a wake word, like Alexa. Crespo's attorney said from the start that he hoped any such recordings would support Crespo's innocence by backing up the accident story. It's unclear if anything useful was captured on those devices, but the very fact that police turned to a smart speaker highlights how bizarre this case was. By the next day, Adam Crespo was under arrest and charged in Sylvia's death. He was later released on a $65,000 bond while awaiting trial, continuing to maintain that Sylvia's death was a tragic accident. In the summer of 2025, Adam Crespo finally faced a jury for Sylvia's case, and local media dubbed it the Spear Trial due to its unusual weapon. Prosecutors presented a painstakingly detailed narrative to convince jurors that Sylvia's death was no accident. They even brought the actual spear-tipped bedpost into the courtroom as a visual aid, allowing the jury to see the imposing 5-foot weapon up close. The prosecution argued that on that night in 2019, Crespo was enraged and deliberately impaled his girlfriend with that makeshift spear. A critical piece of evidence was a cell phone audio recording, rather than an Amazon device, from moments before Sylvia's death. In it, Crespo can be heard yelling at Sylvia to leave and threatening to shoot her. Sylvia's voice could be heard responding defiantly, essentially daring him to do so. This chilling exchange, played for the jury, illustrated the fury and tension just before the fatal struggle. It also supported the prosecution's claim that Crespo had a hostile intent in that moment. The state also called a medical expert who testified that the angle and depth of Sylvia's wound made an accidental self-impalement highly unlikely. The forensic evidence, the expert said, pointed to the blade being driven with force by someone, rather than by a stumble or fall onto the object. All of this was used to portray Crespo as an aggressor who turned a household item into a weapon during a heated altercation. The defense, in turn, stuck to their story that the death was a horrible accident. They called their own forensic expert, who supported the possibility that Sylvia's injuries could have occurred in the way Crespo described. This expert even reenacted a scenario for the jury, demonstrating how a person might fall onto a broken pole in a struggle. For example, the expert had another person yank him off a chair in front of the jury to simulate how a fall during a struggle could cause someone to be impaled by a broken object. During the cross-examination of the defense expert, this was questioned. The prosecution pointed out that his reenactment didn't match the account Crespo had initially given to police, casting further doubt on the accident theory. In essence, the defense expert presented a scenario that was consistent with an accident, but the only problem was, the scenario wasn't consistent with the evidence. Regardless of this weakness, the defense emphasized that Crespo's behavior afterward was inconsistent with that of a criminal trying to cover up a crime. Jurors also heard from Galva's friend who was present in the apartment that night. She recounted how she had overheard the couple's shouting match and then discovered Sylvia gravely injured moments later. Notably, Crespo himself did not testify during the trial, meaning the jurors only heard his version secondhand through his police statement. Defendants in serious criminal trials often decline to testify in their own defense, and Adam Crespo followed that path. The decision wasn't necessarily an admission of guilt, but a legal strategy designed to limit risk. If Crespo had chosen to testify, he would have placed himself directly on the witness stand, where he'd be subject to a rigorous and often aggressive cross-examination by the prosecution. This process can be grueling, as prosecutors are trained to exploit inconsistencies and highlight contradictions. A very good lawyer, on cross-examination, can make even an innocent person look non-credible in the eyes of the jury. In Crespo's case, the stakes were extraordinarily high. A conviction could mean decades in prison. Any slip-up, hesitation, or poorly phrased answer could have carried devastating consequences. By remaining silent, His defense team ensured that jurors would evaluate only the state's evidence against him, rather than scrutinizing his demeanor, tone, or reactions under pressure. This choice, while risky, was a calculated attempt to avoid strengthening the prosecution's narrative. In closing, his attorneys pleaded that while the situation was unusual and tragic, there was no intent to end the life of Galva. On August 11, 2025, the jury ultimately sided with the prosecution. After a 2-week trial and only 90 minutes of deliberation, the Broward County jury unanimously found Adam Crespo guilty in Sylvia Galva's death. The quick verdict signaled that jurors flatly rejected the accident defense. Following the conviction, Crespo was immediately taken into custody, as he had been free on bond during the trial. He now faces a potential sentence of up to life in prison, with a minimum of about 20 years behind bars under Florida law. His sentencing is scheduled for October 31st, 2025, when a judge alone will decide his fate. Thus, a Florida jury concluded that Sylvia Galva's violent death wasn't a freak mishap, but truly an intentional act. What began as a late-night domestic argument escalated into a nightmare. Now the man who wielded that spear-like bedpost will face the consequences for turning an argument into a deadly tragedy. I'll be honest, I was a little surprised by how quickly the jury reached their decision in Crespo's trial. 90 minutes of deliberation is incredibly fast for a case that involved complex forensic arguments, conflicting testimony, and the unusual circumstances of Sylvia's death. Normally, you'd expect jurors to spend more time dissecting expert opinions and weighing the credibility of the defense's accident theory. But ultimately, looking at the evidence laid out during the trial, it does seem like the prosecution did prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's very important here to remember that the test is reasonable doubt, not beyond all doubt whatsoever. The cell phone recording of Crespo's threats, the forensic expert testimony about the wound's angle, and the friend's account of the argument painted a very clear picture. While the defense tried to create doubt, it seems the jury didn't find it convincing enough to even take significant time to consider the verdict. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy just reminding you to click like and subscribe and to check out the YouTube membership and the Patreon. And don't forget to check out my podcast, Lazy Chill True Crime, by clicking the link in the description. Also, if you're listening to this on a podcast format, I've got 3 YouTube channels dealing with mysteries, true crime, and history, so check me out over there as well. On Thursday, August 21st, 2025, a normally peaceful Florida neighborhood became the scene of a horrifying crime. Panicked screams rang out from a house on Slippery Rock Road in Newport Richey, shattering the calm of that summer evening. Officers were responding to what had been reported as a domestic disturbance, but nothing could have prepared them for the gruesome scene they encountered. When police arrived, they found 65-year-old Robert Hayden locked inside his bedroom, writhing in agony from severe chemical burns over his body. The door had been deliberately barricaded shut with a wooden bar and wire, trapping the injured man inside. Even more shocking was who had alerted authorities. The emergency call came from Robert's own wife, 50-year-old Chuan Ying He, who allegedly confessed that she had poured acid on her husband while he slept. Responding officers could hear Robert's desperate cries for help from behind the sealed bedroom door. Forcing their way in, they were confronted with a scene out of a nightmare. Robert had been doused with sulfuric acid, a highly corrosive liquid capable of inflicting catastrophic harm. Investigators later noted he suffered extensive chemical burns across his body, with large areas of skin severely burned and blistered by the attack. The victim was in critical condition, yet somehow conscious enough to tell officers that his wife had tried to eliminate him, according to the arrest affidavit. First responders worked quickly to stabilize Robert and had him airlifted to Tampa General Hospital, as every passing minute was critical to his survival. Sulfuric acid is often used in industrial applications and can cause severe injury or death upon contact. In this case, investigators believe the attack was planned in advance. Police determined early on that the incident was intentional in nature, not any kind of accident or spur-of-the-moment decision. The methodical steps taken, waiting until Robert was lying in bed, pouring the acid on him as he slept, then fleeing the room and barricading the door, all pointed to premeditation. The person responsible went so far as to effectively lock the door from the outside, ensuring the victim couldn't escape or get help after the acid was unleashed. It was a brutally efficient plan intended to maximize suffering and delay any rescue. As the grim events of that night unfolded, investigators began to piece together the backstory of Robert Hayden and Chuan-Ying He's relationship. The couple had married only 1 year earlier, in August 2024, but the marriage had rapidly deteriorated. By March 2025, Robert had filed for divorce, indicating serious turmoil in their short-lived union. Court records showed that Robert was seeking exclusive use and possession of the home, and a crucial hearing in the divorce proceedings was scheduled for August 22, 2025. This was just 1 day after the acid attack. This suggests the pair were still sharing the same residence, an arrangement that may have further inflamed tensions. The arrest affidavit pointed to a clear motive for the assault, and the timing, mere hours before that scheduled court hearing, implies the domestic dispute had reached a boiling point. In essence, the confluence of the impending court hearing and the methodical execution of the attack suggests that Chuan-Ying decided on a horrific course of action. Rather than risk losing the home through legal means, it's been alleged that she decided to slay the man who was soon to be her ex-husband. Indeed, police reports revealed that this wasn't the first sign of trouble inside the couple's household. Detectives with the new Port Richey police confirmed that officers had been called out to the home numerous times in the past for domestic disturbance incidents. Those prior incidents were described as verbal domestics, meaning the couple's arguments had grown loud or contentious enough for someone to involve law enforcement. No arrests were made on those earlier visits, suggesting that the conflicts hadn't escalated to physical violence until now. However, the pattern of turmoil was clearly documented, painting a picture of a deeply troubled marriage behind closed doors. Chuan-Ying is now at the center of this tragic case, accused of carrying out the unthinkable attack on her husband. She was taken into custody at the scene and initially charged with an attempt on Robert's life, given the severity of his injuries. According to police, it was Chuan-Ying herself who dialed 911 after the attack, informing dispatchers that she had hurt her husband with sulfuric acid. This unusual 911 call served as an apparent confession and ensured officers responded swiftly to the address. Upon arrival, police found Chuan-Ying waiting outside the barricaded bedroom, and she allegedly admitted on the spot that she had intentionally tried to eliminate Robert. Investigators now believe that Chuan-Ying's actions that day were premeditated. She had acquired a quantity of sulfuric acid, the exact source of which has not been made public, and waited for an opportune moment when Robert was most vulnerable. By her own reported admissions, Chuan-Ying intended for the attack to be fatal. It appears that in her mind, this was a twisted solution to whatever grievances or fears she harbored amid their faltering marriage. Despite doctors' efforts, the extensive chemical burns proved too severe, and early on Sunday morning, August 24, 2025, Robert succumbed to his injuries. By the end of that weekend, what had started as a domestic disturbance call resulted in Chuan-Ying He's charge being promptly upgraded to a first-degree case. She remains in custody at the Pasco County Jail, held without bond given the gravity of the accusations. Alongside the most serious count, Chuan Ying also faces an aggravated battery charge for the extreme injuries inflicted on her husband. As of the latest updates, it was not immediately clear if Chuan Ying-hee had obtained legal counsel or entered a plea in response to the charges. The case will proceed through the Florida court system, where she will have the opportunity to stand trial for her alleged crimes. Notably, it's unclear whether the prosecution will seek the DP in this case, and if they do, Florida has one of the lowest bars for this severe sentence. At trial, the prosecution will carry the burden of proving that Chuan Ying-hee is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That standard is the highest in the justice system, designed to protect individuals from wrongful conviction. To meet it, prosecutors will need to establish several core elements. First, they must show that Robert Hayden's death was caused directly by the actions of his wife, which, if the allegations are true, likely won't be difficult. The medical evidence, particularly the chemical burns inflicted by sulfuric acid, will be central to this point. Second, they'll need to demonstrate intent. In a first-degree case, it's not enough to prove that a death occurred. The state must show that the defendant acted with premeditation. Evidence like the acquisition of sulfuric acid, the timing of the attack on the eve of a divorce hearing, and the barricading of the bedroom door will likely be highlighted. The prosecution may also lean on statements reportedly made by the defendant herself, including her 911 call and alleged admissions at the scene. If these facts are proven at trial, it may serve as evidence of motive and acknowledgement of her actions. Further, while the onus never shifts to the defense, they may indeed choose to raise a number of potential defenses to why this act occurred. At present, I don't want to speculate on this out of respect for the victim. And as always in a case like this, it's important to remember that Chuan Ying-hee remains innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Anyway, I hope to have an update on this case in a future episode once more facts are known.